Hey, good morning, afternoon, whenever you're watching this. I hope you're all doing well. Um, and today we're going to talk about labor supply, demand, supply, things meet. And that's the orthodox theory of everything. And today we have as a special guest, Corduroy, who is he going to make an appearance, Mr. Puppy? He had his head up a second ago. Oh, okay. There he is. There he is. You can see him down in the over there. Hi, Puppy. Hey, Corduroy. You want to say hello? Corduroy is not labor. He chases balls. He tries very hard to help out. And he's really committed to being a constructive member of the family. But I'm not sure. I mean, he tries to groom the cats. Whenever anything threatens his mommy, my wife, he runs to her defense. Whenever I'm paying too much attention to other people, he runs and jumps up on me and says, "Daddy, remember me, pay attention to me. I'm your dog." Yeah, so is that right, Corduroy? Is that about it? Yeah, okay. Here are cats and dogs. Oh, Corduroy's ready for labor supply. Corduroy loves snow. Remember snow? Will we have snow? I don't want to think about global warming. I have climate change. Okay, supply, immigration, compensating differentials. Hours worked. This is kind of the standard neoclassical labor supply curve, individual labor supply. Wages go up, you work more. Substitution effect, you substitute paid work for home production or leisure. Like, oh, I don't want to waste time going skiing when I could be making so much money. But then it gets high enough, you think, oh my God, I've got so much money, I have to find ways to spend it. I have to take vacations, I have to go to Vail, I have to go to St. Moritz, I have to do those things. Things to do. Okay. There we go. Okay. Demand's one side of the labor market, the other side is supply. How much labor will be supplied at any price? And as I said, neoclassicists like to think of the world as being demand and supply. And that's, gives you a nice equilibrium. Smooth upward sloping supply, smooth downward sloping demand. Mind you, when it comes to, remember when we did demand, and I said the neoclassicists always like to just think about individual demands and then kind of quickly moved over. Okay, we'll aggregate them all. Well, in this case, it's the opposite, because this smooth upward sloping supply curve really only makes sense if you're talking about the aggregate. For an individual, it's never going to be like this. The individual demand curve will always bend back when the income effect of having such a high income swamps the substitution effect. Corduroy got bored. People work because they're paid. Not unreasonable. In fact, we kind of define work as something you do only if you're paid. Otherwise, it's pleasure. Now, what do we do when you get things that are more or less paid, but they're also pleasure? Like me right now. Yeah, they pay me, but I do this because I love it. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about retiring these days, as I probably mentioned, I have this chronic fatigue, post-COVID thing going. I think a lot about, do I have the strength to keep on teaching? But this is what I love doing. So, and I also think about, well, I'm not actually making very much because I have a good pension. And so I don't, but it doesn't matter, but still it's work. Now, when you get to unpleasant jobs, you do expect that people will take them, as we talked about before, take the unpleasant job only if they're paid more, compensating differentials. Now, when you get to the United States economy as a whole, our labor supply is definitely upward sloping because more people will come here when our wages are higher. That is why you may have heard that under Obama, there was a dramatic reduction in undocumented immigration. A little bit because the Obama administration was cracking down on undocumented immigration. But most of these people just didn't want to come because after the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, there weren't that many jobs. And then that undocumented immigration started up again in the last years of the Obama administration because of Obama's economic recovery, the economic recovery under Obama. And it continued under Trump, despite all his bluster and talk about cutting off immigration, building walls, etc. We had relatively high levels of undocumented until COVID, when everything shut down. But okay, people come here in part for higher wages. They also come here push factors to get away from bad things. And those who migrate generally create new opportunities that raise wages for everybody. Not all migrants, but, well, we'll talk about this. Okay, this first. The government says it isn't work unless it's paid. So reading to your younger sister, building a Habitat for Humanity, volunteer work, taking care of your own children. None of this counts as work. Unless your child starts to pay you, or your sister pays you, or your parents pay you for babysitting. They probably are not reporting it, so it's probably not getting into the census. Some people without real work just act like idiots. You inherit too much money, you just... Okay, do labor supply curves slope up? Yes, they do when the substitution effect exceeds the income effect. Higher wages raise the cost of not working for pay. That's why we call it the substitution effect. You're substituting high paid work for home production that is increasingly less valuable. Like you buy takeout dinners. If you're paid enough, you get takeout. Higher wages allow workers substitute market for home production. That's why it's called substitution effect. But also higher wages start to discourage market work because you want to take the time to do something that's more fun. You can afford to go skiing. You can afford to not work anymore. And in fact, most really high income people who inherit a lot of money, most of them don't work very much. Such as Paris Hilton. Now, if the substitution effect's great, as long as the substitution effect's great, the supply curves will slope up. Taxes have both income and substitution effects. Taxes lower the wage, so they make substitution weaker. Taxes also make you poorer. So that reduces the income effect, and that encourages you to work more because you. So if we raise taxes, you're poorer and you work more. We raise taxes, the substitution effect's weaker and you work less. Lower taxes, suddenly you've got more money and you stop working. Lower taxes, your net wage is higher, so substitution effect's greater. So it's not, those effects work in opposite ways with taxes. And generally speaking, to go to the Congressional Budget Office, which is perhaps the most authoritative place in this, and also generally pretty conservative in their assumptions, they conclude that tax increases will have very small net effects. A tax increase will slightly lower work. A tax cut will slightly raise work. So they think the substitution effect will be a little stronger than the income effect in both cases, but and of course they have a whole literature that they draw upon. I am agnostic on this, or I think they're probably wrong. But we do agree that the effects are small. Net effects of tax increases on labor supply are very small. Net effects of tax cuts on labor supply are very small. Okay, do labor supply curves slope up or down? Yeah. Taxes have both income and substitution effects. Higher wages, you don't have to work as long to make your tuition. So you work less. You higher wages, wow, I can make all this money and maybe go to Europe for the summer or go skiing for a long weekend at spring break or something, or go to spring break in Florida. So you work more. Yeah, it's hard to say. If the income effect's greater than substitution effect, then you're in the backward bending part of the, you're over here. You're in the backward bending part of the supply curve. If the substitution effect's greater, you're at this part of the supply curve. It's not clear how things will work out, but as I said, I think they're generally, the net effects are generally small. On the other hand, if you want to explain why the labor force has grown, it's mostly immigration. This is for the last, well, this graph is for 12 years. I should update it, but it's still true for the last 40 years. From the 1950s to the 1980s, the labor force was growing because more and more women were going to the labor force, the paid labor force, especially mothers. That has stopped. Also, men have withdrawn, native-born men have been withdrawing from the labor force, especially those in the 50s and 60s. Also, people have been staying in college longer. So the increase in the labor force since Reagan has been almost entirely from foreigners. And this does not, mind you, that this does not mean that we have a whole lot of immigration. We're a big country, so even an inflow of 3 million is a relatively small percentage of the population compared to past immigration. We've had several waves of immigration. It's kind of interesting that this graphic starts in 1820. Question for you. What are they leaving out by starting 1820? What type of immigration did we have before 1820? Yes, of course, we had some immigration from Great Britain, England, Scotland, Wales, a little from Ireland, the Scots-Irish, especially from Northern Ireland, Irish Protestants, Andrew Jackson's family, the president, his family came from there. But the major group that they're leaving out are African Americans who came here as slaves. And that ended more or less in 1807 when we officially banned the African slave trade. By then, we had brought in 500,000 Africans who were a quarter of the population, or 20% of the population at the time of the American Revolution, a little less than 20% in 1810. By the time of the American Civil War, they were 13% of the population, obviously a much higher part of the population in the southern states. Because between 1807, when we banned the African slave trade, and the Civil War in 1860, we had the first big wave of immigration, which was actually the highest percentage of immigrants, the highest percentage as a share of the total population. We were getting like 4% of the population coming in as immigrants each year. It's huge. I mean, population growth, natural population growth, births over deaths would be 2% or less. So immigration was double the effect of natural population growth. The first part of that wave was from Ireland, the coffin ships fleeing Ireland during the potato famine. Germany came next, especially after the failure of the revolutions of 1848. The second wave was mostly German, although starting to get some coming in from Italy. The third wave was mostly Italy and Germany. Italy and Russia, Greece, Hungary, Southern and Eastern Europe, which came after the spread of capitalism in those places and changes in land tenure that threw a lot of people off the land. And also was promoted by American business, much more so than the Irish or German immigration. But by the late 19th century, early 20th century, we had big businesses, big corporations like U.S. Steel, International Harvester, that would actively, Carnegie Steel before U.S. Steel, that would go to Europe to encourage people to migrate, paying people's passage because they needed workers. That's why you have so many Slavic workers of Slavic descent in the Monongahela Valley, in western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, steel mills. Many Italians were brought into New York to build subways. That migration scared a lot of native-born Protestant Americans who talked about these people coming, they're rooting our civilization, they're not learning English, which is hogwash. Everybody always wants to learn English. They want to learn English before they come here, and they definitely want to learn English after they come here. So we'd be getting 1.5 million, 1 million people a year. Still only 2% of the population, half the rate of the Irish migration of the late 1840s and the German migration in the 1850s. But politically, it was all the same. People hated the Irish. The Protestants here, like, no Irish need apply. We don't want these Irish around. We don't want the Catholics. It was a very strong anti-Catholic political party that ran a candidate for president in 1856, former president of the United States, Millard Fillmore. And he carried one state, Maryland. He got 15% or so of the vote. And then there wasn't as much of political reaction to the 1870s and 80s. People were too busy refighting the Civil War and beating up on African Americans. That's not funny. What was going on was not funny. But then the anti-Catholic, Jewish, East European, Southern European wave after 1900 ultimately led to, first it led to the first anti-immigration law, which led to the opening of Ellis Island in New York. There was a literacy test and health requirements for the first time. We didn't have any way of tracking immigration. I mean, all these statistics were developed by economic historians, and after the fact. And then in the 1920s, we got the first immigration restriction laws, which were targeted to reduce immigration coming from Southern Eastern Europe, which you see that big drop off. Now, notice also that this led to a reduction in Mexican and Canadian immigration, because for the first time in the 1920s, we included the Americans in the immigration laws. Previously, Mexicans would just walk across the border, and they still pretty much walked across the border, but there at least were some visa requirements put in. And then in the 1940s, our immigration policy, 30s and 40s, immigration policy became actually even more restrictive than the laws, because it was enforced under emergency measures during the Great Depression to basically close the borders, with the result that the United States stood by. Not our fault that the Germans are killing everybody, but we did let in several thousand Jewish scientists and scholars and prominent artists, including Albert Einstein and some of the other people, the Hungarian physicist Szilard. I can't pronounce his name. Who can pronounce Hungarian? Not me. Anyway, one of the pioneering people in developing the atom bomb, along with Enrico Fermi. Okay. Call from unknown, meaning spam. Okay, the fourth wave, starting in, because 1967, the Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy, sorry, 1965, we got immigration reform. Coming with the civil rights movement and a lot of national guilt about the way we let so many Jews die in the Holocaust. We let in some displaced persons after the war, but it was still pretty limited. Instead, they went to Israel, Palestine at the time, and then Israel. Some of them started going to Canada and some to Cuba. Many of those who went to Cuba came to the United States after Castro, because the US opened its borders to Cuban refugees fleeing Castro. And some of them went to Canada and Toronto. Canada now is as much the same immigrant share of the population as the United States. And Toronto especially is an extremely interesting city with a very large migrant population. A little different than here, less Mexican, more South Asian, reflecting membership in the British Commonwealth. But then in '65, we opened up the borders, not entirely, but we did away with the national quotas. And we allow, from the 1880s, actually, I'm sorry, I left something out. The first immigration restriction laws were against Chinese, Asians in general, but the Chinese in particular and South Asians. We reached a gentleman's agreement with Japan that they wouldn't let people come to the United States. Complete and total racist bullshit. California, which is now such a melting pot state, led the way, and politicians would support immigration restriction. Even good politicians like James Garfield, who was elected president in 1880, Civil War hero, a really good human being, but he reluctantly signed off on a ban on Chinese migration. to try to carry California for the Republican Party. Okay, anyway, big wave of migration, mostly from Southern America and East Asia, the Philippines, China, India, and increasingly Africa. First time I met a Black African migrant, I was like, I didn't say this to him, of course, but why would anybody, a Black man, come to the United States with such a racist country? But what the hell? He was driving a taxi cab and was making good money, sending it back home, and was going to bring the rest of his family. Okay, that wave peaked in the 1990s when the economy was booming, and it's been, heading down since. Quick quiz question: which immigrant group has the highest educational achievement? Okay, I know you're going to say South Asians. Nope. Nigerians. Over 80% of them are college graduates. Immigration matters more in some industries than others, especially private households, where almost half of private household workers, home cleaners, nannies, are immigrants. The average is like 17%, but you can see accommodations like every motel you go to is run by Indians from South Asia. Management and administration, information technology, a lot from South Asia and from Russia, Russian Jews. Life sciences, fewer from mining, some of the places where people are most likely to vote for Trump, like mining, West Virginia. They may be voting against immigrants, but it's not like they're seeing any immigrants. Okay. Major League Baseball. This 29%, I think that, okay, it's 2017. Okay. I think the figure may be higher than Dominican Republic, 10%. 2 or 3 on every team. I think even more. Does this hurt the game? Does lower wages for native born workers, baseball players? But does it make the game more exciting, increasing sales and helping everybody? Well, obviously, some people aren't getting to play Major League Baseball because they're not as good as people from the Dominican Republic. I didn't realize Venezuela had so many players. I thought, if you asked me, I would have thought Cuba more. 6 from Canada. Wow, who would have thought that? I know one. I've heard of 1 from Australia, but apparently there are 3. Okay. Only 1 from Taiwan. Immigrants are overrepresented in business. This is, if we go back up, the administration management. This is because so many immigrants are running their own businesses. The Indians running motels. Also, restaurants, small grocery stores, bodegas. A lot of McDonald's franchises are run by immigrants. A lot of other franchises are run by immigrants too. So immigrants are overrepresented among business owners compared to the share in the population. They're generally entrepreneurial. People don't come here, to live off Medicaid and food stamps. They come here to work and make money. Many of them go back. Others come here, make money, bring the rest of their family. Immigrants' children earn more than native-born Americans. They bring some of that entrepreneurial drive. There's reason to think that immigrants would generally be more successful than other people back home if they stayed home. They tend to be healthier. It's like sick people don't migrate. They're not up for it. So, and they're particularly ambitious. Okay. That's all the pull factors. But there's also push factor. I mean, here's the monument to the Irish migrants, and then there are people fleeing war in West Africa, Cambodia, migrants fleeing Cuba, and of course, Jews being herded into led to concentration camps to be killed by the Nazis. Nowadays, we have a flow of migrants coming from the Ukraine, but not that many coming to the United States. Several million have gone to countries along the border of Ukraine, Poland, and Romania. Hungary has not been very welcoming. Economic distress is both a push and a pull factor. Free trade undermined economic conditions for Mexican farmers, cutbacks on Chinese Social Security, loss of communal property after Italian unification and spread of capitalism and capitalist land rights in Sicily and southern Italy, collapse of the Irish economy after 2008, the collapse of the UK economy after Brexit may soon be provoking a flow of migrants to the United States. So these are economic distress push factors that are also pull factors. It's like, hell with this country. I'm just going to go to the United States and try to make more money. Okay, and we didn't. This is the St. Louis. When I was young, this was an object lesson in bad US policy. Hitler loaded up a boat with Jews to taunt the West. Oh, you democratic people, you think that you want Jews. Nobody wants Jews. Everybody hates the Jews. And the boat was turned away from Britain. It was turned away from the United States. It sailed down to Cuba, was turned away from Cuba, sailed back to the United States, was sent away. Eventually, these people returned, most of them returned to Germany, where many of them were executed. Donald Trump's father was part of an anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-immigrant group. He was arrested at a rally for the KKK, like father, like son. Okay, push immigration makes U.S. labor supply slope up. Some pull definitely does. Migrants come here to work, and migration tends to be very pro-cyclical. Higher wages need to cover the cost of migrating. Many migrants return, even from push countries. After all, things get better. Some Jews went back to Germany, which I know my mother, German Jew, just could not understand. And I don't think I can either, but whatever. Okay. So when wages are good, when working conditions are good, when you can get a job in the United States, that pulls people in, and the people being pushed are more likely to come here than to Canada. Yeah. Economic opportunity in the US. There's definitely some of both, push and pull. Most of the time, pull dominates. We usually hear about the push when we talk about refugees, whatever. And also sometimes, as I said, it's hard to distinguish. It's not so clear. Like Sergey Brin. Being a Jew in the Soviet Union wasn't great. Being a Jew in post-Soviet Russia is worse, but it wasn't all that. Compared to Hitler, it wasn't that big a deal. But anyway, Jews took the opportunity to leave. Many of them would go to Israel. As soon as they got to Israel, they'd buy a ticket to the United States. Oh, well, okay. Mexicans come here, for economic opportunity. Greeks, oh my God, Greeks, it's like every diner in New York when I was growing up, and I think it's still true, run by Greeks, just like motels run by by Indians, pizza parlors by Italians, and Chinese restaurants by, surprise, surprise, Chinese. In Japanese restaurants run by Koreans. They're almost all run by Koreans. Revenge for colonial oppression. The Japanese treated the Koreans so badly, but the Koreans did learn to cook Japanese food. So Koreans come here and they open Japanese restaurants. Okay, does immigration lower wages? No, the evidence generally is no, because it increases the demand curve as well as shifting the supply curve out. Although in some occupations, it probably does lower wages. Here's, if you were, God, my classmate, Peter Navarro, economic advisor to Donald Trump. We went to graduate school together. He was kind of a standard liberal neoclassicist. In fact, he ran as candidate for Congress as a Democrat in the 1990s. Campaigned for Bill Clinton. It was a bit weird in that he hated China, but wasn't something you necessarily knew about him then. I hardly knew him, but anyway, Peter Navarro is not only a proponent of the big lie about the 2020 election, but also big anti-immigration guy. Not as bad as Stephen Miller, whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Stephen Miller, speechwriter to Trump, and the vicious things Stephen Miller says. It's like, he's been everybody from his rabbi to his family members have disavowed any, expressed open disgust for him. But anyway, he asked Peter Navarro, this is what he would say happens with immigration. The labor supply curve shifts out. More people will work at any wage. With the downward sloping labor demand curve, that will mean those extra people will get hired only if wages fall. Simple. The problem is it's not as simple as that, because unskilled and skilled migrants may both increase the demand for native-born workers. You get these guys coming here from the Dominican Republic. And all of a sudden there's more demand for people to make hot dogs and serve beer at Fenway Park. So that increases demand for those forms of labor. You get skilled people, but also executives at Google and Sun. Google, Russian Jews, Sun, Indian. They are complements they're substitutes for American-born CEOs, but they're complements for all sorts of other American-born workers, including unskilled workers sweeping the floors at Google, and skilled workers, engineers, data analysts at Google. Unskilled workers are complements to native-born workers, chefs and waitresses. More people can clear tables and wash dishes, well, then we'll hire more chefs and we'll have more wait staff. All these people created businesses in the United States. Sun, Yahoo, Google, Huffington Post. Immigration moves both the demand and the supply curve. You get skilled people coming in, that shifts out the demand curve for unskilled. Yeah, the unskilled shift out the supply curve, but you may end up with higher wages. Similarly, there's no question immigration of unskilled shifts out the demand curve for skilled. So skilled workers definitely benefit. Plus, skilled workers often employ the unskilled. Who's paying for all those people to come and clean house and nanny? The evidence is that immigration raises wages for most, if not all, workers. The effect for people without a high school diploma is very small, but probably positive. The effect for people with college, strongly positive. All workers, positive. Okay, think about labor supply. This is popular view that labor's bad. But you don't have labor. As I said, I think about this a lot. I love what I do, and I want to keep doing it. It would be horrific if I couldn't do it. And in fact, men who retire have a spike in mortality in the 6 months, in the 3 months after they retire. Men especially get their yayas from working for pay. And this idea of the original sin idea that work is Adam's curse, gives the idea that you have to do, the people will only do it under coercion and incentives, and you have to force people to work. It's really true, and in fact, a lot of the forcing people to work stuff stifles creativity. If you are forced to do something, you never do it very well. You're always trying to pretend to work, like Dilbert cartoon, and you're not going to be that creative. To be creative, you have to have your mind free and relaxed and open, and you have to be willing to take chances. All that's inhibited by coercion and incentives. The most productive companies foster what Stephen Veblen called the instinct towards workmanship. Corduroy, that's the stuff. Call it corduroy. Cut it out. The desire to demonstrate competence and to contribute to the community. The best companies and the most productive companies are those that do less of this monitoring. This has become all over the place, what companies do. Most big companies now have some form of productivity monitoring. And that productivity monitoring, it never really monitors what is really productive. You monitor me. When do you know what I'm working? You're going to monitor how many keystrokes I put in? That's a stupid measure of my productivity. What about the time that I'm lying around thinking? It reminds me of Stephen King. He was once more than once, he says it's the most common question he gets, asked where his ideas come from. And he said that he hates that question because if he knew where his ideas come from, he would just go there every day and do it. But he never knows where his ideas are going to come from, whether it's going to be while he's walking on the beach or he's sitting at a cafe looking at the people go by, or if he's going to a museum, or if he's just sleeping late. He never knows where he's going to get an idea. It's that way for creative work, which increasingly is what Americans do. Right or wrong, with globalization, we've sent a lot of the the easily monitored work out because American companies want to be able to check on something. You're not going to send the work you can't check on to Mexico or China or Malaysia, because it's far away. You can't check on it. You know, you got to send them the work that you can monitor. You know, through your information technology system. The creative work we keep here because we want to be able to keep eyeballs on it. You know, maybe you shouldn't be keeping such eyeballs on it, but former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, in his book "The Wealth of Nations," The Work of Nations, talks about you know, Hollywood people, they do their work sitting in a hot tub, talking to each other, tossing ideas around. Yeah, but that's the instinct towards workmanship. These people, they want to come up with a creative product, and that's what we're good at in this country. And that's where we make lots of money because Americans are better at it than anybody else. So slope of the over time, slope of the labor demand curve, down for a while, up for women until the 1980s when it leveled off, flat, down. You know, maybe it doesn't really matter because immigration has always been the major source of flexibility in the American labor supply. Immigrants pick our crops, work in our kitchens, built our railroads. Why did we bring in all these African slaves? We brought them in because nobody would work in, you know, in the rice fields, the tobacco fields, and later the cotton fields voluntarily. Nobody would work in the Europeans' sugar fields in the Caribbean and Brazil and Cuba and Louisiana voluntarily. So they brought in coerced labor. Okay, supply side economists assume an upward sloping supply curve. Curve's backward bending, then supply side economics kind of falls apart. Keep in mind, Americans don't work. You know, we used to be a low work economy. Now we're a high work economy. We work more than do people in most other, well, the countries that give here, every other advanced capitalist economy. And a lot more compared to the Germans. We work 350 extra hours a week. That's like 10 weeks. Compared to the Norwegians, we work 450 hours more. Compared to the French, 300 hours more. We even work more than the Canadians. We work like 70 hours. That's like 2 extra weeks work. It sucks to be an American. Look at all these vacations everybody else gets. Actually, I think we get 14 now. Didn't we make Juneteenth a holiday? So I think we now have 14 vacation days. And the most productive workers work the least. Although Americans are more productive than the Germans. Let me look at the Italians. How much do the Italians work? Oh, yeah, they work 240 hours less than we do. Okay, without immigration, labor supply curves may not slope up, but the income effect would dominate substitution effect native born. Maybe. I mean, at some point it does. We know that really rich people rarely work. You know, Bill Gates retired young. Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos. Well, Steve Jobs worked till he died. Jeff Bezos still works for pay, whatever. You know, I don't think these guys are working for pay, for the money. I think Jeff Bezos is working just because he enjoys it. Rich people generally have better things to do for their time. Michael, what's his name? Former mayor of New York. Look, I'm on, sorry. George Soros is giving his money away. You know, people go helicopter skiing. I mean, I'm chicken shit. I wouldn't do it, but it's probably a blast. I have a friend, French historian. This guy's insane. He climbs up mountains with skis strapped to his back and then skis down. Yeah, the guy is in such good shape. And it's probably a lot of fun. I don't know. Not for me though. I'm too risk averse. Okay, like I said, you expect substitution effect to dominate at first, but then labor supply eventually it's going to bend back. It has to. It doesn't make sense for somebody to keep on working. Why should we care about labor supply curve? Some people don't. I don't know if you do. I do. It's not something that I find intrinsically exciting, and I always thought labor supply gets too much attention from labor economists because I don't think wages are the major determinant of labor supply, but it is a really important policy issue. When people talk about the effects of tax cuts, Reagan tax cuts, Trump tax cuts, they're talking about a lot of what they're talking about is labor supply. Raise tax on the rich, they'll work less if it's substitution effect dominates. If it's the income effect dominates, they'll work more to make up for the lost income. Since the two more or less cancel each other out, it doesn't matter much. Oken assumes substitution effects dominate, and that's a major problem with his analysis. And it's been part of what sparked this enormous research project in labor supply. Okay, and here's the CBO estimates by income group. At the lowest income, substitution effect really dominates. But when you get higher up, not much effect. And it's never a big effect. It's never a big effect. An elasticity of 0.1. A 10% increase in taxes will have a 1% reduction in labor supply. Not a huge effect. 10% cut in taxes, like the Reagan tax cuts, 10% cut in taxes, which actually the Reagan tax cuts was a 10% cut in rates on income tax. So the effect on taxes was much less, especially at the lower end where Social Security taxes are much more important. But a 10% cut in taxes would have maybe a 1%, 1.5% increase in work effort, and it would be much less than that. And that's the outer range of tax changes. So not much. Okay, orthodox theory of inequality, productivity, labor supply, compensating differentials. Education makes people more productive. That's why you're here. And high wages compensate for the hard work of going to school. Really? Do you believe that? Or are high wages just or is schooling a way of screening out people, just rationalizing wage differentials and screening people to get into the better jobs? Training new skills, restricting access to some professions, sorting people into good or bad jobs, like the hat. Where do you belong? Okay, Adam Smith and compensating differentials, the law of one price as applied to wages. If two jobs have the same wage, but one is much less pleasant, nobody's going to go to it. So that job is going to have a higher wage to compensate, as long as everybody can choose where they're going to go and there's open access. Read this paragraph and think about it. Adam Smith was a smart guy. And he has his 5 agreeableness or disagreeableness of the employments. I have a very agreeable employment, so I should have a low wage. Difficulty and expense of learning. Well, yeah, took a long time. Let's see. I got my job here at UMass when I was 27. And I got my PhD when I was 28. And I was promoted. I was given tenure when I was 34, something like that. Promoted to associate professor, full professor, but I was 40 something, whatever. Okay. Constancy or inconstancy of employment. Well, I have constant employment. Small or great trusts, which must be reposed in them. I suppose there's a pretty lot of trust reposed in me, although the university is always trying to crack down on us, but it's like, fuck them. Lay off. Probability and probability of success. Well, when I went to graduate school, maybe half the people got university jobs, which is very high, coming from Harvard. Of those, maybe half got tenure, were promoted to associate. Maybe a quarter of the people who, oh, wait, no, because 20% of the people didn't finish the program. So half of 40%, 20% of people ended up being a success, having success. And that's coming from Harvard. So the probability of success is pretty low in academic life. Workers will take bad jobs only at higher wages. Sure. If we can really define bad jobs, and if people really know what they are, and if people really have fair choice, free and fair choice. They'll only take the good, safe, easy work at a low wage, or they will be willing to take it even at a low wage. They'll only take the bad job at high wage. And really, if work sucks, no one will do it unless you give them something. Well, except a lot of these jobs end up getting low wages also. Yeah, after all, who earns more, the pimp or the hooker? Why do hookers earn less than pimps? There's some element of restricted access and the power that being a white man gives you in society. Why do surgeons earn so much more than retail clerks? Compensating differentials for training, high probability of failure, of not being able to get the job. Yeah, it's all that. But also, the American Medical Association, which was originally established to restrict access to the trade, first thing it did was close down 3/4 of the medical schools in the country. A lot of them deserve to be closed down, so it's not as simple as that. But still, it was restricting access to the trade and pushing up earnings. And it's been doing that ever since. Why do surgeons earn more than internists? Greater training time, responsibility. How do you define responsibility? Secondary school teachers earn more than middle and elementary school teachers, earn more than kindergarten teachers, more than preschool teachers. Have you ever tried to teach preschool kids? This is hard work. School bus drivers, that's a sucko job. You think they should earn more money? Roofers should earn more money. I don't know. Most bad job characteristics do not have compensating differentials. The only strong compensating differential in the research is mortality. And even that is very, very variable. Low productivity workers get low pay and bad conditions. Lack of information, macho attitudes in many workplaces, restrict access to the trade because we'll beat you up if you try to take this job away from another white male. bad jobs. Some people stuck with them because they're black, female, Hispanic, whatever. We really wish there were more compensating differentials paid, and then we wouldn't have to have government regulation of safety conditions. But it doesn't seem to work that way. Okay. More dangerous jobs, compensating differentials, information, immigration, etc. Okay. So we covered a lot of different ground today with a lot of different ideas. So I thought it was great fun. I hope you did too. Live long and prosper, and have a great day. Bye-bye.